You know, nobody expected a resurrection. I mean, we sit around thinking about all these strange theological thoughts on what happened historically wise and what could have happened, Jesus coming out of the tomb, and who could have stolen the body. They still claim that some people, that Jesus' body was stolen instead of in the grave where it was supposed to be because it's missing. Nobody expected Jesus to rise from the dead. The disciples didn't. They were scared to death for their life. They were hiding in the upper room. They thought that they were going to get crucified next, just like their leader. They didn't know where the world was going. All they knew was the God that they had worshipped, that they had come to know in 3 years, was now taken from him. He had died like normal men. Now where would they go? What would they do? Like Peter, probably go back to fishing. They didn't know what to do. They were full of distress. They were full of trouble. They didn't know what to do or where to go. Nobody expected Jesus to rise from the dead. And nobody had any plans or plots to steal a body. Everybody was distraught. The Romans didn't worry about the body being stolen. The Romans had sealed the tomb. It was against the law to break the seal, and it took 2 or 3 men to move the tomb into place, the seal, and then took 2 or 3 men to move the stone out of the way so that people could go in and out and pay their respects to Jesus' body before they finally sealed it for good. The scribes and Pharisees didn't think that Jesus would rise from the dead. They were convinced that if they didn't have the tomb sealed, and they insist on it, because the Romans didn't want to spend the time to seal the tomb, they didn't want to bother with the body of Jesus because they were done with this crucifixion stuff. But it so happened that the scribes and Pharisees insisted and had enough political pull that they go seal the tomb. There was no one that expected Jesus to rise from the dead. Mary Magdalene, who could not sleep during those 3 nights that she had seen the crucifixion, wandered into the tomb at night just to be near her dead Lord. And there, while she was crying, she heard somebody moving around. Turned around and was sure it was a gardener. So she turned around and said, "Sir, please, if you've taken the body of my Lord, please tell me where you laid it, and I'll get it out of your hands so that you don't have to worry about it anymore." She thought the body was sitting there somewhere. She didn't expect him to rise from the dead, and so she would rush over there and take care of it so that they wouldn't have to worry about it. And the man she was talking to said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said, "Because I just told you. You took the body of my Lord. Please tell me where it is. I'll take it off your hands so you don't have to worry about it." And then suddenly the familiar voice said, "Mary." And she looked up with the sun shining in her eyes and said, "I know that voice." And then she realized, Jesus. She didn't expect Jesus to be alive. He was dead. She saw him die. Now she reaches for him. She'll never let him go. And Jesus says, "Don't touch me. I haven't yet ascended to my Father, which is heaven. I've got another state I've got to go to. I've got to become new. But go. Tell my disciples and the women that I have risen from the dead, and I will come there shortly and talk to them." And Mary rushes back to tell what she's seen. It's on Sunday, as the women are going down to anoint the body, that they're suddenly talking about this stuff. But not very happily. Nobody's joking. It's a very somber point for them. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, is heartbroken. But when the disciples see afar off that the tomb is really open, they rush to see where the body might be. And they rush into the tomb. And the voice of the angel says, "What are you doing here? Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen. Go back and tell the disciples what you see." Everybody rushes back to the upper room. Everybody in the upper room talks about, we've seen Jesus, we've talked to him, he's now alive. Everybody's saying, wait a minute, what are you talking about? That's not possible. Nobody believes that Jesus is alive. Nobody was ready to make an understanding of some conglomerate story where Jesus suddenly somehow had risen from the dead. Nobody expected that. And Thomas brought a head to it. He said, wait a minute. Unless I touch the scars, and unless my hand goes in the place where that spear went in his side, I will not believe that it is Jesus. It's at that point that Thomas is interrupted by that familiar voice. Thomas, come here and touch me. Put your hands in my scars. Feel my side. Thomas feels and falls to his knees and says, my Lord and my God. Thomas didn't believe he was going to come from the dead. Thomas believed he was dead, unless he had proof. And Jesus said, Thomas, you believe because you've seen. Blessed are they who have not seen and yet believe. And then the stories of Easter are amazing. At one point, men from Emmaus are walking home, and suddenly a man pops out of nowhere and explains the Old Testament scriptures and shows how Jesus was to be crucified and then rise from the dead. And while they're standing there eating with him, offering their lunch to him because they're at home, they watch Jesus start to realize who it is, and then they wonder, wait a minute, this isn't possible. He died. He was killed. That's where we're coming from. And yet, when they stare at him eating, which is hard to believe that a dead man would be able to eat, they see him swallow, and suddenly he disappears. And they say, wait a minute, that was Jesus. And the stories by themselves are amazing. Now, poor Peter has heard these stories. He doesn't know what to think. He's scared to death. He denied his Lord. He betrayed him. He turned against him. Now, Jesus is alive again. He's going to have to face him. Jesus comes to the disciples and says, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself. Before the time of the Great Commission, Jesus talks to them and says, Peter, do you love me? Peter says, you know I love you, Lord. Then feed my sheep. 3 times he does this. And then suddenly Peter realizes that 3 times, in various levels of love, Jesus is forgiving him for his betrayal and asking him to go out there and be the rock of his church. Finally, 2,000, 3,000, and yes, 5,000 people come to see Jesus just before he ascends to the skies. When he finally ascends, he gives them the gospel. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every living creature, baptizing in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the earth. All power is given to me. It's a crazy story. And yet it's the most hopeful story of all time. It's the one story that says to you and I, we can be overcomers to the greatest enemy in the world, death. Like Jesus said at the tomb of Lazarus, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Then he asked the question, do you believe this? Well, do you? Do you understand that the greatest power in the world is in the hands of Jesus, and every power that exists comes from his hands first? Every political power, every social power, every religious power, every status, every ability to take a breath comes from Christ. All power is given to me in heaven and in earth. Nobody believed the resurrection. Nobody planned on some kind of plot to make it look like he had risen. But the resurrection is our hope that Christ is alive, that God is alive, and that we will live long after we have died. If a man die, shall he live again? Sure, every man will die. But even Job, who asked that question, answered it by saying, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and shall in the latter days stand on the uttermost parts of the earth, and all the world will know that there is a God. Give him a chance. Make this the greatest Easter of your life by asking Jesus into your heart and letting the power of God be a part of your life. May God bless you.